One of the things I find quite interesting about a lot of ideologues, specifically those who talk about video games, is that when they talk about video games, they always have this odd mindset that video games are sending a specific message. The messages sent from these video games always involve something harmful, something problematic, or something that can be troublesome if applied to reality. The problem with that mindset is thinking that video games are actually sending this same message to everyone, when in reality it's just the ideologue's interpretation of the whole thing. We're gonna explore a video that talks about this sort of topic. It's a brand new video from TEDx at the University of Alberta that has come to my attention thanks to pretty much everyone who sent me this video and asking my thoughts on it. And after watching the video, the one thing that keeps lingering on my mind is that this video looks like it was made in late 2014. The arguments and the talking points are so unbelievably ancient in terms of talking about sexism in video games. Turns out this video is actually released in 8th of May 2018. The video talks about Horizon Zero Dawn, which if the video was made in early 2014, it would certainly be incongruous to the timeline. This video was made just recently, and yet it still have talking points that you would commonly see only in the early years of 2015. But hey, some people still feel some sense of nostalgia from 3 to 4 years ago. So why not have a little bit of throwback into some good old classic response to an ideologue's typical talking points regarding video games and gamers. The video title is Sex, Lies, and Video Games, which can also be phrased as Sex and Video Game Lies. The topic is obviously going to be talking about strong female protagonists, but we're going to talk about the ones that don't have to wear sexy outfits because the speaker personally feels uncomfortable about it.
I remember asking my dad about Resident Evil 4 and why the girl was always needing to be saved by the guy. She's useless, was my general opinion of her, and I think that was my dad's too.
So far so good, I guess. Ashley is indeed pretty useless in that game, but you forgot to mention the other female character in Resident Evil 4 who isn't actually useless, kicks a lot of ass, and you can even play as her in a separate side story. Actually, Resident Evil in general contains some of the most badass female protagonists out there, to the point where a very large portion of the games have a female protagonist. So, no, I guess it's not so far so good. This is a terrible start. You are incredibly selective in your choice of game in a series that actually has strong female characters. You could have talked about them a lot more in the conversation, but carry on.
And one day, I was sitting around and I was Googling one of my favorite things to Google: fully clothed women kicking ass in video games.
You're actually not too far off. Try Googling these games.
And I realized the things I had noticed as a little kid, like the useless girl from Resident Evil 4, they weren't just common things, they were more common than I had once thought.
You need to watch more TV to see that damsels in distresses are more common in any forms of media.
This idea of men saving the princesses, or as women merely being accessories to the male heroes in video games, these weren't just common ideas from my childhood, they are still part of a culture that exists today.
I'm still trying to figure out what's wrong with any of those things. Those are the most common storytelling tropes out there that works back then and it still works right now. I don't see how this is in any forms of way troublesome or problematic.
This is Jade from Mortal Kombat, a fighting game released in about the 90s. And it's still ongoing today.
I'm still waiting for you to articulate what the problem with Jade's outfit is.
In contrast to Jade, we've got Sub-Zero from the same game, Mortal Kombat, but he looks a little bit different. He looks very comfortable and outfitted for combat in his combat gear.
Ah, so your point is double standards. One character is dressed more sensibly and the other one is not dressed as sensibly. Well, there are so many characters in Mortal Kombat, both male and female, that are both sexualized and not sexualized. For example, I can replace these two characters you picked with Sonya Blade and Liu Kang, and then make the argument that men are more sexualized in Mortal Kombat than the women. Of course, you would counter this by saying that there are more women being sexualized in the games, but the point that I'm trying to say here is cherry-picking examples to make a very general point is not a very good argument to convince those who know more about the source material, which isn't actually your objective. Your objective is to talk to the people who don't actually know anything about video games and convince them to your point of view. But unfortunately, aside from the fact that these sorts of arguments are extremely outdated, taking examples from very well-known games would only be a detriment to your point of view, because people can very easily counter this without even doing any sorts of research, just on the basis that they are familiar with the games that you're talking about, which you are not familiar with.
What we can see from these two characters is that the power dynamics are vastly different. But the thing about this physique is that it is one of power and dominance, where women's power comes from their sexualization.
Unfortunately, it's true. There are a lot of women in fiction and in real life who uses their sexuality and femininity as a way to dominate over others. There's even a name for that trope. I think you are intelligent enough to know it.
And this paints a very different picture of capability between men and women women in video games.
Now, the phrase send a message, paint the picture, or equivalent will be pretty frequent throughout this critique, and you might notice that the messages being sent here are entirely based on the speaker's point of view, rather than the general world's point of view. The speaker here is trying to say that with games like Mortal Kombat, where women are being sexualized, it sends the message or paints the picture that women in video games only merely uses their sexuality as a way of dominance. There are several problems with this critique. One, the message being sent here is based on the speaker's interpretation of the game, not what the game is actually saying. In my perspective, Jade in Mortal Kombat is a kick-ass fighter who just so happened to wear these sexy outfits. In the speaker's perspective,
Jade looks like a bit of an idiot because who shows up to a fight wearing a bra? Jade, on the other hand, looks like she woke up this morning and then got lost on her way to a pool party, at a strip club, at a Playboy mansion, in the desert.
It is certainly not me or any other gamers who played Mortal Kombat who paints Jade as a whore. It is you. 2. Jade always dresses like that throughout the entire game. The costume looks sexy at first, but then it gets really old. You want to know more about her skills, her abilities, her combos, what she can do in the game, a lot more so than the outfit, which is the least important thing when playing Mortal Kombat or even any other fighting games in general. I mean, it can be used to distinguish yourself from other players in, say, Tekken, but even the combos and the juggles are still more important than the actual costumes. And 3, like I said, the idea that women use their sexuality as a way to assert power and dominance, it's true. Women do use their sexuality and femininity as a way to dominate over others. It applies in both fiction and in real life. Have you seen the incredibly stupid article from The Guardian recently of how white women uses tears as a weapon to manipulate others? Goddamn, Guardian, that is a pretty racist and sexist piece that you put in there. Of course, it's not the only thing that women are capable of, but again, that leaves us to the first point. It's your interpretation. It's what you think a game's message is trying to send, when in reality, that's not what the game is trying to say at all. Or maybe the game isn't trying to say anything. Maybe Jade is just designed like that just for the sex appeal. I still have no idea why any of those things are wrong in your point of view. Why is sex appeal for the sake of sex appeal wrong or immoral? That's what I would love to know. Carry on.
This is Grand Theft Auto 5, and women aren't treated very well in this game.
There's a female cop in there apprehending a woman who is presumably committing a crime, and then there's a woman in a bikini. What's wrong with a woman in a bikini?
Essentially, this boils down to their lack of agency in both the gameplay and the narrative.
Just because a fictional character doesn't do what you would normally do in a certain situation doesn't mean that they don't have agency. It just means that they're an idiot, they're helpless, or they are poorly written. A helpless character doesn't mean a character without agency. You can still have agency and still be helpless. And most importantly, helpless female characters do not equal to misogyny.
What this means is that, for example, you can hire a prostitute, sleep with her, kill her, and then walk away like nothing ever happened.
The problem with that is the prostitutes that you talk about in GTA are not major characters. They are just non-playable characters, and they are in a lot of ways completely powerless to the player. This applies to pretty much almost every NPC in the game. Focusing merely on the prostitutes clearly highlights your unbalanced priorities.
This is Batman Arkham City. Now, you do play as Batman for most of the game, he is the protagonist, but you also have an opportunity to play as Catwoman. Except
Catwoman is not an NPC, is integral to the game's story, and is capable of defending herself against multiple sets of thugs.
So Batman is often attacked based on how freaky he looks in his costume. Whereas Catwoman, she is attacked, and please note she is also wearing a costume, she's attacked based on her gender.
Well, she uses her gender, her femininity, and sexuality to get what she wants. So in a lot of ways, she absolutely deserves to be treated as such.
Catwoman gets catcalled based on her gender, and it is her personal attributes that are being attacked.
Catwoman has a very thick skin. She doesn't need you to defend herself from the gendered insults and everything.
Super Mario Brothers is guilty all the same, and this one's a bit tricky because Princess Peach isn't actively running around in lingerie, but Mario has been saving her for a very long time.
Do you see how the arguments on this video are extremely outdated? Mario saving the princess has been a trope for decades because it's a formula that works with every game. I assume that your issue with this is that the game sends the message that women are helpless and always needs to be saved, but the game doesn't really send that message at all. It sends the message that Princess Peach is helpless and always needs to be saved, which is why she's not everyone's favorite character in the Mario franchise. Although the same thing cannot be said to the cosplays.
Peach doesn't have any agency. She's either getting captured by Bowser, the primary male antagonist of the game, or she's being saved by Mario, the primary male protagonist of the game.
To support my point that you can have agency and still be helpless, even if you give Princess Peach any sort of agency, Princess Peach fighting against Bowser is not exactly what I would call a winning battle. You could perhaps argue that she needs to have her own fighting skills or abilities to be able to at least slow him down, which in that case, welcome to the bus, my friend. You are decades late with this complaint.
Her fate is decided for her entirely by the men around her. She can just kind of sit there and hope that everything works out okay.
In other words, she is pretty useless. This is an opinion that is shared by pretty much almost everyone who played Mario, at least ignoring her depictions in other games where she isn't useless. Can she be better? Yes, but then again, not every female character should be strong and independent, and since we're dealing with Bowser, who even Mario and Luigi find incredibly troublesome, I think it's safe to assume that Princess Peach is not gonna have the hero role anytime soon.
So what is the problem here?
Oh please, do tell me what is the problem here?
Well, these games and the games like them, they reinforce ideas of misogyny, that women need men, that women don't have an agency of their own, and that women's power comes from their overt sexuality, much like Catwoman, while at the same time, they are chastised for that same sexuality.
That is entirely your interpretation. You are the ones who think that the game sends the message that women are helpless. We do not get that message from these games at all. This is a complete misrepresentation of the game's overall message, or maybe even lack thereof. Maybe these games just want to show a game with a story that just so happens to involve a damsel in distress. Now what you need to explain to me is how these harmful misogynistic ideas apply to the real world.
It doesn't matter if 100% of men play video games and 0% of women do, because sexism is never okay, no matter the audience.
What sexism? How is Mario saving the princess count as sexism? Wouldn't actual sexism be Mario not saving the princess merely because she's a woman and that she can take care of herself? Actually, reinforcing the belief that women can handle themselves could actually cause a lot more sexism in the process. So if you don't save the princess, it's sexist, but if you do save the princess, it's also sexist.
It's just confusing. Is it sexist to hit you? Is it more sexist to not hit you? I mean, the line gets real blurry.
Now, what is okay is equal representation of gender.
Unfortunately, that is pretty much impossible to pretty much almost every game genre in existence. Every gender has their preference in what type of games that they play the most. To create an equality of outcome where the gaming audiences are equally represented is impossible. That means that women should also have the same interests as men in the types of games that they play, a situation that is unfortunately incongruent to reality.
Now, why is that important, you ask? Well, that is a great question, but it's also a really tough one. So thankfully, Mark Rosewater has answered it for us.
Actually, I want to know why as well. Why is it so important? So please, Mark, answer this mysterious question.
Seeing a warped world is harmful for everyone, men included, because it leads to a warped worldview. Seeing less women or minorities in entertainment sends a message that they are less important in the real world, that they play less of a role. Having a majority of male players makes it even more important that we strive to make games that reflect the real world, because perceptions shape reality.
Oh boy, there are so many things to unpack here. Seeing a warped world is harmful for everyone, men included, because it leads to a warped worldview. It's really hard for me to say warped for some reason. This is indeed very true, except it doesn't apply to the things that you consider to be warping people's worldview. Seeing less women and minorities on entertainment sends a message that they are less important in the real world, and that they play less of a role. This is a message that is based entirely on your own deluded interpretation. The message being sent is not only not intentional, but it's not even a message being sent at all. Seeing less women and minorities in fiction doesn't mean that their role in the world is not important. You are the only person who thinks this way. You are projecting your deluded worldview to others. This level of projection is second best only to IMAX theaters. How can someone come into the conclusion that because there are more majority men in fiction, therefore that means that women and minorities are not important at all in the real world? This is very much akin to saying that video games cause people to get violent in the real world. In a lot of ways, you are saying that video games or any other fiction that has a majority demographic will make you hate women and minorities or consider them to be not important at all. There's little to no difference. This is another form of moral panic, one that is incredibly freaking outdated and pretty much no one buys the narrative anymore, but you keep spewing it as if people still believe in this.
So when games are being designed depicting women as only sexualized objects or as only being yelled at in sexist ways, it sends a message back to the real world that not only is that acceptable behavior, but that it is something to just be expected.
So you are saying that the things that people do in fiction will also apply to the real world. That's very nice to know.
We're telling women that they can't be heroes.
Some of your previous examples suggest otherwise.
Why do we still suck at portraying half the world's population in this medium? And to even begin to answer this question, let's look to Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm gonna skip this part. Anita Sarkeesian is a person who spread lies, misinformation, and misrepresentation of video games and the gaming community as a whole. The harassment towards her is not because she's a woman, but because of the reasons I stated prior. You do not slander video games and the gaming community and expect sympathy from it.
I know I don't have all the answers, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think one of the reasons for this might be because to the privileged, equality feels like oppression.
This is actually, in a lot of ways, another form of projection, especially considering that we were talking about Anita Sarkeesian, who was endorsed by almost every major gaming outlet and mainstream media out there. So yes, you are indeed correct. To the privileged, equality does feel like oppression. At that point, she points to a couple of recent games that contain strong female protagonists, except she pulls one hell of a misstep.
This is Mass Effect 3, released by a local BioWare Edmonton studio here. And the cool thing about this game is that you can play as a male or a female, so you can choose to play
Okay, stop. You can also do this in Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2. You can also do this in every Dragon Age game, every Baldur's Gate, every Knights of the Old Republic. You can do this in Jade Empire. This is a company that you worked on, and yet for some reason you are completely unaware of their previous games.
I am ready for change because I have seen it and I know that it is possible, but I also know there is still a long and difficult fight ahead, and I will not be wearing just a bra to fight it. I will be wearing a full suit of armor designed for me, by me, and I will continue to push for this change as a gamer, as a game designer, but mostly as the little girl watching her dad play video games.
That is an unnecessarily emotional argument, but your first point does highlight the motif behind all of this. It's all due to personal preference. You prefer female characters to not wear ridiculous outfits. You prefer them to wear full suits of armor. You prefer them to not be sexualized. Well, more power to you. But the problem is, just because a game doesn't cater into your own personal preference doesn't mean that it's misogyny or that it's sexism. And most importantly, it also doesn't mean that any of those aspects will translate into warped worldviews that people have. If anything, you are the ones who have a very warped worldview of video games, and this is you sharing your warped worldview into the public so that they can have an even more warped worldview of this game. Jesus Christ, I am so bad at saying warped.